Ethan Cole had always imagined the apocalypse as something distant, something out of a movie. But as he stared out at the ruined city, the shattered windows, and the twisted wreckage of abandoned cars, he knew this was real. The world he once knew was gone. He crouched behind an overturned SUV, gripping a blood-stained baseball bat. His breath came in short gasps. The scent of decay lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. A few feet away, a lone zombie shuffled aimlessly, its sunken eyes scanning the street with a hungry, mindless gaze. Ethan swallowed hard. He had been lucky so far. For the past 2 days, he had survived by scavenging and avoiding trouble. But luck never lasted. A distant scream cut through the silence, sharp and terrified. Ethan flinched. The zombie's head jerked up, responding to the sound. And then, chaos. From the shadows of the alleyways, from behind broken-down cars, the horde emerged. Dozens of them. Moaning, stumbling, their dead eyes locked onto a single target, the source of the scream. Ethan knew what was coming. A woman, barely older than him, sprinted into view, her eyes wide with terror. She tripped over a corpse, scrambled back to her feet, and bolted toward him. "Help me," she gasped. Ethan hesitated. He wanted to help. But if he did... The first zombie lunged, grabbing at her arm. She screamed again, struggling, but there were too many. They fell on her like a pack of starving wolves. Her cries turned into a gurgled, blood-choked wail before she was silenced forever. Ethan clenched his jaw and forced himself to look away. If he had stepped in, he would have been torn apart too. But now, he had a bigger problem. The horde had tasted fresh blood, but their hunger was never satisfied. Some of them turned, sniffing the air like animals. Their lifeless eyes locked onto Ethan's hiding spot. He muttered a curse. Then he ran. His boots pounded against the cracked pavement as he sprinted through the streets. Behind him, the horde howled in pursuit. Ethan zigzagged through alleyways, leaping over debris and dodging rusted vehicles. His chest burned, his muscles ached, but he couldn't stop. A chain-link fence loomed ahead. He had seconds to act. With one final burst of energy, he grabbed the metal and pulled himself up. Hands reached for him. Fingers clawed at his boots. He kicked down hard, breaking the grasp of a rotting hand, and rolled over the top of the fence, landing hard on the other side. For a moment, he lay there, gasping. The zombies on the other side snarled and moaned, pressing against the fence. But they couldn't climb. He was safe. For now. Ethan pulled himself to his feet and surveyed his surroundings. He was near an old shopping mall, its doors shattered, its interior dark and foreboding. It was risky, but he needed supplies. He stepped inside, gripping his bat tighter. The air was stale, filled with the scent of rotting food and something far worse. As he crept through the aisles, he spotted a convenience store. Most of the shelves were ransacked, but there were still a few cans of food, a half-empty water bottle, and, jackpot, a flashlight. He stuffed everything into his backpack. Then he heard it. A faint sound. A shuffle. Ethan froze. From behind the counter, a figure stirred. A low growl rumbled through the silence. A pair of dead eyes locked onto him. The zombie lunged. Ethan barely had time to react. He swung his bat, cracking it against the creature's skull. It staggered, but didn't fall. One hit wasn't enough. The zombie grabbed his arm, its grip ice-cold, its teeth snapping inches from his face. With a desperate yell, Ethan wrenched free and swung again. This time, the bat connected with sickening force. The zombie's head caved in, and it collapsed to the ground, unmoving. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, his hands shaking. He had survived. But the noise would attract more. He had to move. Grabbing his backpack, Ethan ran toward the exit. The apocalypse had taken everything from him, but he wasn't done fighting yet. The battle for survival had just begun. Ethan didn't stop running until he was sure he had put enough distance between himself and the shopping mall. His heart pounded, his breath came in ragged gasps, and sweat dripped down his forehead. The streets were eerily quiet now, but he knew better than to trust the silence. He crouched behind an abandoned truck, taking a moment to catch his breath. His hands trembled as he rummaged through his backpack, pulling out the half-empty water bottle he had found. He took a slow sip, savoring the cool liquid. Every resource mattered now. The undead had overrun the city, but the biggest threat wasn't always the zombies, it was other survivors. Ethan's grip tightened on his baseball bat as he heard the distant sound of footsteps. Not the sluggish, uneven shuffle of the undead. These were quick. Precise. People. He pressed himself against the truck, peering around the side. A group of 4 moved cautiously through the wreckage of the street. They were armed, one carried a crowbar, another had a pistol tucked into their belt. Their clothes were tattered, faces hardened by survival. Ethan hesitated. Should he call out? Before he could decide, one of them, a wiry man with sharp eyes, stopped and raised a hand. The others froze. "We're being watched," the man said. His voice was low, controlled. Ethan cursed under his breath. He had stayed too long. Then, before he could react, one of them pointed a shotgun directly at the truck. "Come out," a woman ordered. Her tone left no room for argument. Ethan knew he was outnumbered. If they were hostile, he wouldn't stand a chance in a fight. Slowly, he stepped out from behind the truck, keeping his bat lowered but ready. "Easy," he said, raising his free hand. "I'm not looking for trouble." The wiry man studied him for a moment before lowering his crowbar. The woman with the shotgun, however, kept it trained on him. "What are you doing out here alone?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. Trust was a rare thing now, and giving away too much information could be a death sentence. "Just trying to survive," he said finally. "Like everyone else." The group exchanged glances. Then, the wiry man extended a hand. "I'm Mark," he said. "This is Jenna, Alex, and Sam." Ethan shook his hand cautiously. "Ethan." Jenna, still gripping the shotgun, narrowed her eyes. "You alone?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah." A tense silence settled between them. Then, Alex, the youngest of the group, spoke up. "We have a place. A safe house, just outside the city." Ethan's stomach clenched. A safe house? Could it really be safe? Jenna scoffed. "Why are you telling him that? We don't even know if we can trust him." Mark sighed. "We could use another set of hands, Jenna. The more people we have, the better our chances." Ethan wasn't sure what to do. Going with them could mean safety, or it could mean walking into a trap. "What do you say?" Mark asked. Ethan glanced at the darkened streets, the distant moans of the undead echoing through the ruined city. Alone, he wouldn't last forever. "All right," he said. "I'll come with you." They moved quickly, sticking to side streets and alleys. Mark led the way, occasionally signaling for them to stop when he heard something nearby. Ethan kept a close eye on the group. He still wasn't sure if he could trust them. As they crossed through an old market district, a loud crash shattered the quiet. A metal trash can tipped over, rolling across the pavement. Everyone froze. Then came the growls. From the shadows, zombies emerged, half a dozen at first, then more. Their sunken eyes locked onto the group, mouths stretching open in hunger. "Run!" Mark shouted. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted alongside the others, his heart hammering. They dodged between ruined storefronts, pushing over obstacles to slow the zombies down. But the horde was fast, and they weren't slowing. "There!" Sam pointed to an old auto repair shop with its garage door half open. Without hesitation, they ducked inside. Ethan slid under the metal door just as Mark yanked it down. Bang! The zombies crashed against the outside, clawing and snarling. For a moment, they all stood there, catching their breath. Jenna glared at Ethan. "We shouldn't have stopped to talk to him. This is exactly why I don't trust strangers." Ethan clenched his fists. I didn't bring the zombies here. Mark held up a hand. Enough. We're all in this together now. Jenna muttered something under her breath but didn't argue further. Ethan scanned the repair shop. It was dark, filled with scattered tools and abandoned vehicles. It would work as temporary shelter, but they couldn't stay here forever. Is your safe house close? He asked. Mark nodded. A few miles north. Ethan exhaled. He had made his choice. Now, he just had to survive long enough to see if it was the right one. The auto repair shop was their temporary haven, but Ethan knew better than to get too comfortable. The sound of the zombies scratching at the door served as a constant reminder of how fragile their safety was. The group had set up a makeshift barricade inside, using everything from tires to engine parts, and though the garage door held firm, the air was thick with tension. Ethan sat in the corner, watching as Mark unpacked a small bag of supplies. The others were scattered around, some resting, others sharpening weapons. Jenna had her eyes on him again. She hadn't trusted him from the moment he showed up, and her distrust was becoming more obvious by the minute. You sure you're not hiding anything? She asked, her voice sharp. Ethan looked up. What do you mean? I mean, it's not exactly normal for a guy to be wandering around alone in the middle of the apocalypse. She folded her arms, her gaze unwavering. You've got to have some kind of story. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. The truth was, he didn't want to talk about his past. It was too painful, too fresh. But Jenna wasn't going to let up. I lost my family, he said quietly. I was at work when it happened. The outbreak spread so fast. I didn't even have a chance to get home. Mark, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. It's the same for all of us. The world fell apart, and we were left to pick up the pieces. Jenna didn't soften, but she nodded. Just don't think for a second that we're going to hand out trust for free. If you screw us over, we won't hesitate to leave you behind. Ethan nodded, understanding. It was the survivor's code: trust no one, help only when necessary, and always be prepared to walk away when things went south. But somehow, in the last few days, he had begun to wonder if there was more to this new world than just surviving. Mark looked around at the group. We need to move out in the morning. The longer we stay here, the more likely the Horde will find us. Jenna, Sam, check the supplies. Alex, you're with me, let's take a look at the barricade. Ethan got to his feet, deciding it was best to help, even if he wasn't fully trusted yet. What can I do? Mark gave him a quick glance, then nodded toward the corner. There's a set of old tools over there. Grab whatever you can. We might need to reinforce the barricade or make some traps along the way. As Ethan rummaged through the tools, he couldn't help but notice the look of unease on Jenna's face. She didn't like him. That much was obvious. But he had learned that it was better to keep your distance when you weren't welcome. He focused on the task at hand, grabbing a wrench and some nails, preparing to help reinforce their escape route. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Ethan helped where he could, tightening bolts, securing windows, and making sure every possible escape route was covered. He kept his head down, working quickly but with little conversation. The more time he spent with the group, the more he realized how fragile this fragile alliance was. Finally, as night began to fall, the group gathered around a small fire they'd managed to build in a barrel. They huddled close for warmth, their faces drawn and weary. Mark leaned forward, breaking the silence. We've got two choices: we can head north to the safe house, but it's still a long journey. Or we can try to make it to the outskirts of the city and find a vehicle. Jenna spoke up, her voice low. We're not going anywhere without a plan. And we need to be sure we can trust the people we're traveling with. Ethan sat back, listening carefully. He knew the truth. Trust was a rare commodity, but it was necessary for survival. There was no room for second-guessing. They needed each other if they were going to make it out of the city alive. What's your plan, Ethan? Mark asked, catching him off guard. Ethan hadn't expected the question. His gaze shifted between Mark and the others. I think we should head north. There's a chance the safe house is still intact, and we'll have a better chance of finding food and shelter there. The outskirts are too dangerous, too many raiders looking for easy pickings. Jenna raised an eyebrow. And you trust the safe house? Just like that? I trust that it's better than staying here, Ethan replied, his voice steady. The longer we stay in one place, the greater the chance we'll get overrun. Mark considered this for a moment before nodding. All right, we head north at first light. But we stick together. No one goes off on their own. Ethan glanced around at the group. He wasn't sure if they would make it, but it was their only choice. They had to stick together. If they didn't, the odds of surviving the apocalypse were slim. As the fire flickered, the group settled into uneasy silence. Each of them knew what was at stake. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day filled with dangers, but also a chance to make it out of the city alive. Ethan lay down, staring at the ceiling of the shop. His thoughts wandered back to the family he had lost, to the world that had been ripped apart. But tonight, for the first time in days, he felt a sliver of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The sun had barely risen when the group packed up and set out, their eyes weary but determined. They'd scavenged what little food and supplies they could find, loading their backpacks as quietly as possible. The last thing they needed was to attract any attention from the undead. Ethan's mind was preoccupied. Despite the slight sense of camaraderie that had begun to form, he couldn't shake the unease that lingered. He had learned one hard lesson in the apocalypse: anyone could betray you if it meant saving their own skin. Jenna had been especially distant since last night, her distrust of him palpable. But it wasn't just her, it was the others too. Mark, Sam, and Alex had their own reasons for keeping to themselves. It was clear they'd all been through more than enough to make them cautious. And Ethan couldn't blame them. They moved through the city's outskirts, avoiding the main roads and sticking to alleyways, where the stench of death was stronger than ever. Every corner seemed to hold new threats, whether it was a lurking zombie or the possibility of another survivor group who didn't share their code of trust. Stay close, Mark ordered, his voice low but commanding. Ethan nodded, keeping his distance but staying within sight. The group had formed a tight formation, with Mark in the lead, Jenna next, then Sam and Alex, and Ethan bringing up the rear. They passed through crumbling buildings, the sounds of their footsteps the only thing breaking the silence. It was around noon when they came to the remains of a gas station. Mark signaled for them to stop. "We'll scavenge here," he whispered. "But keep your eyes peeled. We don't know what's lurking around." Ethan stayed close to the group as they fanned out, looking for anything useful. He noticed Jenna eyeing him warily, but he didn't address it. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, prying open a vending machine that had long since been emptied of snacks. The silence was broken by a sudden noise, footsteps. Ethan spun around just as Mark turned toward him, signaling with a sharp gesture to get down. The others crouched low, blending into the shadows of the station. Through the haze of dust and broken glass, another group emerged. 4 people, all heavily armed and looking just as desperate as Ethan's group. "We need to move," Jenna muttered under her breath. "We don't want to get caught between 2 groups." Mark nodded in agreement. "We wait for them to pass, then we move." But as the strangers came closer, Ethan caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. One of them was holding a familiar-looking bag. His bag. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as his mind raced. How had they gotten it? He had been careful, he had kept everything close. But someone had stolen it. Someone within his group. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. It was Alex. Ethan had noticed him sneaking away from the camp last night, just before they had gone to sleep. He had told himself it was nothing, just someone looking for a quiet moment to themselves. But now, everything was falling into place. His hand tightened around the handle of his bat, but he knew he had to stay calm. Reacting recklessly would only make things worse. "Stay down," Mark whispered, but his voice had a different edge now. There was a tension in the air, a warning that things were about to go south. As the strangers drew closer, Mark made a sudden decision. We move now. They sprinted from their hiding place, moving fast through the cracked streets. Ethan's mind was reeling, but he focused on staying in formation. He had to talk to Mark. He had to confront Alex before things escalated further. But just as they rounded a corner, a shout rang out from behind them. Stop right there. It was Alex. Ethan whipped around, his heart pounding. Alex was standing at the mouth of an alley, his face twisted into something almost unrecognizable, fear, desperation, and something else. You don't understand, Alex said, his voice cracking. I had to do it. We were running low. You saw it. I needed to get something for us. The others stopped, looking back at him in confusion. Mark's jaw tightened, his hand moving to the knife at his side. What the hell are you talking about? Alex swallowed hard. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. But the others. Jenna stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. Who else? Who's in on this? Ethan's stomach twisted as Alex's gaze darted nervously. Finally, he pointed to Sam, who was standing slightly behind Mark. Sam's face went pale. No, Sam said, taking a step back. Alex, don't you dare. But it was too late. The truth had already come out, and in the blink of an eye, the group had fractured. You two, you're both leaving, Mark said firmly, his voice ice-cold. No, Alex protested, his hands shaking. I didn't want this. I thought we could trade. Ethan could see the panic in his eyes. He knew the feeling, when you're pushed so far, you'll do anything to survive. Mark shook his head. Not anymore. You put all of us at risk. We don't trust you. Jenna's face was hard as stone. You should have known better. In an instant, the decision was made. Alex and Sam were out of the group. Alone, they would face the consequences of their betrayal. Ethan didn't look back as they left. His heart was heavy with the weight of what had just happened. But this was survival. And in a world like this, trust was more fragile than ever. They had to keep moving. The decision to cast Alex and Sam out was not made lightly. As the group moved forward, the air between them was heavy with the aftermath of betrayal. No one spoke of it directly, but the tension was palpable. Each of them knew the risks of keeping traitors around, and though they had no choice but to expel the two, a lingering unease settled over the group. Ethan, more than anyone, felt it. Betrayal had become a part of life in the apocalypse, but it didn't make it any easier. They traveled at a steady pace, sticking to the side streets and back alleys, moving quickly and quietly. The scent of decay was thick in the air, the smell of rot and blood following them wherever they went. Every turn, every corner, could bring them face to face with a horde of zombies or worse, a group of hostile survivors. Mark was leading the way, his sharp eyes scanning every possible threat. Jenna stayed close behind him, her shotgun at the ready, while Alex and Sam's absence weighed heavily on them. Keep alert, Mark warned, his voice a low murmur. We don't know how far the horde has spread. We've got to be careful. Ethan nodded, though his mind was still on the betrayal. It was hard to shake the feeling of distrust. Could he ever trust anyone again? They crossed an old bridge, the rusted metal creaking beneath their feet. Below, the city stretched out like a ghost town, abandoned, silent, and dangerous. Ethan's heart beat faster as he scanned the horizon, his instincts on edge. The further they ventured, the closer they came to the center of the city, where the chaos had started. This is it, Mark said, stopping at the edge of the bridge. The safe house should be just up ahead. We're almost there. Ethan's throat tightened. Could they really be this close to safety? Or was it just another false hope? They pressed on, moving through the desolate streets. As they neared an old residential area, a new sound reached their ears, a low, ominous growl. Jenna held up her hand, signaling the others to stop. They all froze, their eyes darting around, listening. The growl grew louder, closer. Then, from around the corner, they saw them, zombies. A group of at least 20, shambling toward them, their eyes glazed and lifeless, their movements slow but relentless. Mark swore under his breath. "We need to move. Now." They turned on their heels, backtracking through the streets. Ethan's heart raced as the group sprinted through the city, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the growling and shuffling of the undead behind them. A scream pierced the air. It wasn't one of the zombies, it was Jenna. Ethan whipped around just in time to see her trip over a pile of debris, falling hard to the ground. A zombie was on her in an instant, its rotting hands reaching for her throat. "Jenna!" Mark shouted, rushing to her side. Without thinking, Ethan charged forward, his baseball bat raised. He swung it with everything he had, connecting with the zombie's skull with a sickening crack. The creature collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Mark was already pulling Jenna to her feet. "Are you okay?" She nodded, panting, her face pale. "Yeah. Just got caught off guard." "We need to keep moving," Sam urged, his voice tight with urgency. "More are coming." They didn't need to be told twice. They continued running, taking side streets, ducking into alleys when the zombies got too close. The city, which had once felt like a maze of opportunity and civilization, now felt like a tomb, a place where death was always a step behind. Ethan felt the weight of his bat as he swung it at the occasional zombie that got too close. Sweat stung his eyes, his legs burned from the exertion. The adrenaline was wearing thin, and he could feel his body starting to shut down. But there was no time to rest, no time to stop. Not when the Horde was breathing down their necks. As they reached a familiar intersection, Mark stopped, his eyes scanning the area. "We should take the subway tunnels," he said. "It'll be dark, and the zombies tend to stay away from the underground." The group didn't hesitate. They turned down a narrow alley that led to the entrance of the subway system. Mark quickly pried open the heavy metal door, and they ducked inside, one by one, closing it behind them. The tunnels were dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. It was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of their breathing. "Stay close," Mark whispered. "The tunnels are dangerous. They're not just filled with zombies. There are other things down here too." Ethan nodded, his hand tightening on the bat. He had no idea what Mark meant, but he wasn't going to ask questions. The fewer the words, the better. As they moved deeper into the subway system, the air grew colder. The tunnel was labyrinthine, twisting and turning as they descended further. There was no telling how far they would have to go to reach the other side, if the safe house was even still standing. Ethan glanced over at Jenna, who was walking beside him. She still hadn't said much, her face set in an expression of grim determination. "How much further?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Mark glanced over his shoulder, his face grim. "Not far. Just a little longer." But as they walked further into the dark, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The quiet of the tunnels felt too oppressive, like something was watching them, waiting for them to slip up. Suddenly, a loud screech echoed through the tunnels, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "What was that?" Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a deep growl filled the air, one that was far too close for comfort. And then, the darkness shifted. The growl reverberated off the damp walls of the subway tunnel, an eerie sound that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. The quiet of the dark underground seemed to swallow the noise, but the sense of impending danger was palpable. Whatever it wasn't human. Ethan's hand tightened around his bat as he strained to hear any further sounds. Mark, in front of the group, had already raised his hand in a silent signal to halt. His face was tense, every muscle in his body coiled and ready for action. "Stay quiet," Mark whispered, barely audible over the rush of their breathing. "Listen." For a moment, all they could hear was the sound of their own footsteps echoing back to them, bouncing off the concrete and steel of the tunnel. Ethan's mind raced. What could be down here with them? Zombies were bad enough, but Mark's words had made it clear that there were other dangers lurking beneath the surface. "Get ready," Mark muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the dim tunnel ahead. Suddenly, there was another growl, this one much closer than before. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he instinctively took a step back. His pulse quickened as the noise grew louder, a rumbling, echoing sound like something large and hungry moving through the tunnel. "Something's down here," Jenna said, her voice barely more than a whisper. She had her shotgun raised, her eyes darting from one shadow to the next. "And I don't think it's just zombies." Mark nodded grimly. "No, it's not. Keep your guard up. Whatever it is, we don't want to encounter it." He turned to the group, his voice firm. "We keep moving. But stay close. We don't want to get split up." They continued down the tunnel, the flickering light from their makeshift torches casting long, strange shadows on the walls. The smell of stale air mixed with the faint odor of rot, a reminder of how long this place had been abandoned. But there was something more, something unsettling in the air, a shift in the atmosphere that Ethan couldn't quite explain. Then, without warning, a shadow darted across their path. A low hiss echoed from somewhere ahead, sending the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck standing on end. "Did you see that?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the creature emerged from the shadows, a massive, hulking figure. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of rotting flesh and scavenged materials. It had the jagged, mutilated form of a human, but it was too large, too monstrous, its limbs disproportionate and grotesque. The creature's eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers, and its mouth stretched into a snarl. It had the scent of death about it, but it wasn't just another zombie. This was something else. "Holy hell," Mark hissed under his breath. "It's a crawler." Ethan felt his stomach drop. Crawlers were rare but deadly. They were zombies mutated by the virus, adapted to be faster, stronger, and more dangerous than regular undead. They weren't mindless like the others, they were cunning, relentless hunters. The crawler bared its teeth and hissed again, its long claws scraping against the concrete as it moved toward them. Ethan's heart raced, and his instinct screamed for him to run, but he knew there was nowhere to go. They were trapped in this tunnel with the creature closing in fast. "Move!" Mark shouted, and without hesitation, he lunged forward, tackling the crawler with all his might. The two of them collided with a deafening crash, the crawler's claws scraping at Mark's armor as he struggled to keep it off him. "Get back!" Jenna shouted, aiming her shotgun at the creature, but the distance was too short. One wrong move, and she'd risk hitting Mark. Ethan didn't think. He just acted. He swung his bat with all his strength, catching the crawler in the side of the head. The force of the blow sent it staggering, but it didn't fall. It turned its twisted, monstrous gaze toward him, its mouth snapping open in a vicious roar. Ethan swung again, connecting with its skull, but the crawler's skin was too tough, the blow barely slowing it. It let out a low growl, more enraged than ever, and charged. Mark scrambled back, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws. "We need to take it down, now." "Fire!" Jenna yelled, her voice cracking with panic. Sam, who had been frozen in place, finally pulled himself together. He raised his gun, firing a shot that hit the crawler in the shoulder. It stumbled, but only for a second before it charged again, faster now, more frantic. The group barely had time to react before the crawler was upon them. Ethan swung his bat again, this time aiming for the creature's neck. The impact cracked with a sickening sound, and for a moment, it seemed like the creature might go down. But it didn't. Instead, it screeched in fury, throwing itself back at him. Mark lunged forward once more, this time landing a powerful blow to the crawler's chest. The force of the strike finally sent it tumbling to the ground, twitching in its death throes. For a moment, there was silence. The group stood frozen, their breaths shallow and quick, eyes wide with shock and fear. The crawler's body twitched one last time before it finally fell still, its glowing eyes dimming. "We need to move," Mark said, his voice strained. "It's not safe here. There's more of them." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. They had barely survived their first encounter with the things that lurked beneath the city. And as much as he hated to admit it, he knew they weren't alone down here. They couldn't stop now. Not with the Horde above and the dangers below. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady, but his heart pounding in his chest. "We have to find that safe house. Whatever it takes." And so, they continued deeper into the tunnels, hoping that the horrors of the subway would be the worst they would face. But deep down, Ethan knew, this nightmare was far from over. The air in the subway tunnels grew colder the deeper they went. Every step felt like a descent into hell. The group walked in tight formation, their faces lit only by the flickering glow of their makeshift torches, the darkness around them pressing in like a suffocating weight. The stillness of the tunnels was broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional distant growl, echoing from deep within the maze of underground passageways. Ethan's thoughts kept circling back to the crawler they had just destroyed. It wasn't just a mindless zombie, it had been intelligent, dangerous. And there was no telling how many more creatures like it were lurking in the shadows. His grip on the bat tightened. Each creak of the tunnel, each distant noise, made him jump. They moved quickly, but not recklessly. Mark led the way, his eyes scanning every corner, every opening. He had been in this part of the city before, but even he seemed to be on edge now. The silence was unnatural. The deeper they went, the more oppressive it felt. "Stay alert," Mark muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "We're getting closer to the old train yard. It should be clear from there. We just have to push through." Ethan nodded, but he didn't feel reassured. In fact, the deeper they went, the more he had a sense of foreboding, something wasn't right. The tunnels felt different now, like they were being watched. Like the darkness itself had a life of its own. "Do you hear that?" Jenna's voice broke the silence. She had been walking a little behind Ethan, but now she was stopping, her hand gripping her shotgun. "It sounds like whispering." The group froze. The growls they had heard earlier had been unnerving, but this was something else. A low, indistinct murmur echoed through the tunnel. It sounded almost human, but distorted, like voices from the depths of some forgotten nightmare. "Keep moving," Mark ordered, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. He glanced over his shoulder, his jaw clenched tight. "Whatever it is, don't engage. Just keep going." But as they moved on, the whispers grew louder, closer. Ethan felt a cold chill seep into his bones, a primal fear that made his blood run cold. He glanced around, but all he could see was blackness, the flickering light barely enough to illuminate the tunnel in front of them. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. And then, there was a scream. A terrible, ear-splitting scream that echoed off the walls of the tunnel, sending waves of panic through the group. It wasn't the scream of a human. It was a shriek, raw and guttural, full of pain and rage. Ethan's heart raced as he turned toward the source of the noise. It had come from deeper in the tunnel, just ahead. "Move!" Mark shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "Get to the train yard, now!" But before they could take another step, something moved in the shadows, fast. A figure emerged, its body twisted and malformed. It was human, but barely. The skin was stretched and pale, the limbs elongated and disjointed. Its eyes were wide and wild, pupils dilated, and its mouth hung open in a twisted grin, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too long. The creature let out another scream, and before anyone could react, it lunged forward, moving with a speed that defied its grotesque form. "Get back!" Jenna fired her shotgun, the blast ringing out in the narrow tunnel. But the creature didn't even flinch. It charged, faster than they could react, its claws swiping at the air. Ethan barely dodged in time, the creature's hand grazing his shoulder. The impact sent a sharp pain through his arm, but he gritted his teeth and swung his bat at the creature, connecting with its head. The creature stumbled, but it wasn't enough to take it down. Mark rushed in, tackling the creature to the ground. "Keep moving," he yelled, his voice strained as he grappled with the monster. "We can't waste time here." The group didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted forward, leaving Mark behind to hold the creature off. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as they pushed through the tunnels. The sound of the creatures' shrieks echoed in their ears, growing louder as they ran. They reached the train yard, finally. The massive, dark expanse of the old station loomed in front of them, the rusted trains standing like forgotten giants in the dark. For a moment, it seemed like they were safe. But as they approached the platform, a sudden realization struck. The train yard was not empty. From the shadows of the trains, more figures emerged, more of the twisted creatures. Dozens of them, all equally as monstrous as the one they had just encountered. Some moved on all fours, others slithered, and some even seemed to crawl along the walls of the station. All of them had the same crazed, terrifying eyes, the same mutilated forms. There was no way around them. "Mark!" Jenna shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "We're surrounded." Mark finally reached them, his face pale, his breathing ragged. "We have to fight our way through." Ethan's mind raced. They had no choice. They were surrounded on all sides, and these weren't just zombies. These were something much worse. Without hesitation, he raised his bat, his body bracing for the oncoming fight. He wasn't sure how much longer they could survive this, how much longer they could keep running. But one thing was certain, if they were going to die here, they weren't going to go down without a fight. The twisted creatures lunged. The creatures charged toward them with terrifying speed. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest, his grip tightening around the bat. The twisted monstrosities, their eyes glowing in the darkness, were closing in from all sides. The air was thick with dread, their snarls and hissing filling the space, reverberating off the rusted metal of the train yard. "Get to cover!" Mark shouted, but there was no time to retreat. The creatures were already too close. Ethan swung his bat with all his strength, connecting with one of the creature's skulls. The blow sent it staggering, but it didn't fall. Instead, it screeched in pain and fury, its head lurching back as if unaffected by the hit. Another one lunged at him, its mouth wide open, ready to rip into his flesh. Jenna's shotgun roared in the dark, blasting the creature back. The force of the shot sent it sprawling across the ground, its body twitching before it lay still. But there was no time to celebrate. More kept coming, more of those twisted forms, more shrieks, more violence. "Fall back!" Mark barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to make it to the train. If we can get inside, we might have a chance." The survivors moved as one, fighting tooth and nail to push through the onslaught of creatures. Mark grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward an old train car parked at the edge of the yard. It was a rusted, broken-down relic, but it offered the best chance they had. The others followed, guns blazing, but they were rapidly losing ground. Another creature lunged at Sam, its long claws slashing across his back. He cried out in pain but managed to shove it off, firing his handgun point-blank into its chest. The creature's body jerked violently, but it kept coming, its horrific, contorted body moving with a relentless, unnatural speed. "Sam!" "No!" Jenna screamed, turning to help, but there was no time. More of the creatures were closing in fast. "Get to the damn train!" Mark shouted again, this time with a deadly urgency in his voice. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He was already sprinting toward the train, his bat swinging wildly as he tried to keep the creatures at bay. He could hear the sounds of the others running behind him, but they were out of time. The creatures were too fast, too strong. They wouldn't make it to the train without a fight to the death. They reached the train, and without hesitation, Mark yanked open the rusted door. It creaked loudly, but they had no choice, they had to get inside. One by one, they climbed through, with Ethan pushing the last of them in before slamming the door shut. The creatures, screeching and clawing at the walls of the train yard, were just a breath away from them. Inside the train, it was dark, except for the dim light of their flashlights. The group was breathing heavily, trying to regain their composure. Ethan's hands shook as he leaned against the wall, his heart still pounding in his chest. They were alive, barely, but the danger wasn't over. "They're outside," Sam gasped, clutching his bleeding side. They're not going away. We're trapped. Jenna turned to Mark, her face pale. What do we do now? Mark's expression was grim. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes scanning the old train car. We wait. They'll try to get in. But this train's reinforced, should be enough to hold them off for a while. That's not enough, Ethan said, his voice sharp. We can't just sit here and hope they give up. We need to fight. Mark shook his head. We fight when we have to. But right now, we need a plan. We need to make sure we don't run out of supplies before help arrives. Ethan wanted to argue, to push, but he saw the truth in Mark's eyes. They couldn't just keep fighting forever. They were exhausted, injured, and outnumbered. If they didn't find a way to escape, they would eventually run out of options. Hours passed in the train. The sounds of the creatures outside faded slightly, but it was clear they were still out there, pacing, waiting. Every now and then, one of them would scrape against the metal of the train, sending a fresh wave of panic through the group. The tension was unbearable. I've been thinking, Mark said quietly, his eyes narrowing. There's an old freight line that leads out of the city. We could take the train. It's a long shot, but it's better than sitting here. Ethan's mind raced. A freight line? They hadn't thought about that. But it's not operational, Jenna said. The tracks haven't been used in years. I know, Mark said. But if we can get the train moving, we might be able to outrun them. The problem is getting to the engine. We're not just fighting zombies now. We're fighting time. The group fell silent, considering the plan. It was risky, but they didn't have much of a choice. If they stayed in the train for too long, their supplies would run out. If they didn't try something, they would die here. We do it, Ethan said finally, his voice steady. We get to the engine, start the train, and get the hell out of here. Mark gave him a nod of approval. All right. We move fast, we move quiet. And we keep our eyes open. There's no room for mistakes. They set out, knowing that each step could be their last. The creatures were still out there. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a glimmer of hope. As the survivors prepared to make their move, the door to the train shuddered, and a clawed hand slid through the gap, just inches away from grabbing them. The battle for survival wasn't over yet. It was just beginning.